BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast. I'm Kaz Graham, and in this edition we're in Scotland hearing how farmers are concerned about demands from the government for a new whole farm plan. And when can brands and advertisers safely use the Farming with Nature tag? The UK's advertising watchdog weighs in on the term regenerative agriculture.
We've taken preemptive action to try and effectively set some guardrails around its use so as to avoid consumers being potentially misled.
More on that a little later. First, though, the 9,500 acres of the Rothbury estate in North Northumberland was described as the largest block of land to come on the market in England in the last 30 years. Now it's been announced that the Wildlife Trusts have bought part of it and started a £30 million appeal to buy the rest. This two-phase acquisition includes 12 tenanted upland farms where often the same family have lived and farmed for generations. So what does this change of ownership mean for them? Our reporter Joe Lonsdale has been there to meet Mike Pratt, the Chief Executive of the Northumberland Wildlife Trust, to find out more about their plans.
So we've come to Lorden Shores, which is on the western end of the estate. And behind me, the Simonside Hills. In the stones around us are some of the cup and ring marks, the prehistoric art that shows that this land has been lived in for thousands of years. Mike, are you sort of pinching yourself that you've actually bought all this?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited about this whole potential of this place because we realise it's a once-in-a-generation opportunity. This is for everybody, both locally and nationally.
This is a land which is largely farmed by tenant farmers. Let's hear the view of one of them, a tenant farmer who, not within this estate, but farms close by. And this is his nervousness, really, about the project.
Hi, I'm Mark Mather. I'm a tenant farmer and a county councillor. I think it's a concern for the people that live there and work there. We need to ensure that their voices are heard and are taken seriously. Well, I think the concern in the industry is it's either green agenda or it's agriculture. And what we don't want to do is to remove those people and lose our generations of knowledge about the land and about the industry. It's the unknown. The name Wildlife Trust just, makes you feel slightly nervous. The sheep industry is getting a lot of pressure and, we need to protect that industry. We've heard recently about declining numbers in breeding stock and the availability of breeding stock going forward. And large estates like this, if it does go down the route of reduction in sheep numbers, that will only add to those pressures.
Mike, is your long-term vision more a rewilded landscape, a landscape perhaps with more trees on and fewer sheep? I mean, we're surrounded by sheep here. That's how people farm here.
Well, it's going to be different, obviously. We haven't just bought all of this just to keep it exactly the same. But obviously we want to work with farmers and the community to see how we can continue farming, but also get nature benefits and actually reward those farmers for actually helping us get more nature, more biodiversity and abundance back on this land. We want to have, obviously, more broadleaf woodland connecting along the riverways. So, yes, there'll be some change, but within that there will be a farm landscape as well.
What would you say to people who say land should be about food production, not necessarily prioritising nature?
Well, I would say that increasing biodiversity actually helps that happen. We need to look after our soils a lot more. From the ground upwards, we really need to improve nature. So it's not just as simply what you do on top of the land, it's looking after the whole of it.
Mike Pratt, the Chief Executive of Northumberland Wildlife Trust. Chilling, that is the word that John Swinney, Scotland's First Minister, used to describe the effect of changes to inheritance tax in this autumn's budget on Scotland's farmers and rural businesses, speaking just before he took to the stage at yesterday's AgriScot conference in Edinburgh. Agriculture is a devolved power and the four nations of the UK are developing their own policies. But changes to UK-wide tax, including APR or agricultural property relief, apply across the board. He said it was deeply disappointing that the Scottish Government hadn't been consulted on these changes to taxation, which, he argues, are causing unacceptable levels of stress amongst farmers and could prove extremely damaging to Scottish agriculture.
The proposals that have been put forward on inheritance tax by the UK Government run the risk of undermining the ability of farms to be passed from one generation to another. And I want to appeal to the United Kingdom Government, and I'll work with the National Farmers Union in Scotland to advance this argument, for there to be a rethink about the unintended consequences of these changes, because they stand to be profoundly damaging to the sustainability of Scottish agriculture.
John Swinney. And in response, a UK government spokesman said, this budget took the difficult decisions to fix the public services crumbling across the United Kingdom, including Scotland, and address the £22 billion fiscal black hole inherited from the previous government. With 40% of agricultural property relief going to the 7% of wealthiest claimants, we made the decision to ensure the relief is fiscally sustainable. Around 500 claims each year will be impacted, and farm-owning couples can pass on up to $3 million without paying any inheritance tax. This is a fair and balanced approach. Well, we're discussing farming in Scotland all this week, and the Scottish Government's new Agriculture Act now requires every farmer and crofter to complete an annual whole farm plan in order to claim their basic support payments. The plan is a series of audits to measure things like the carbon footprint and biodiversity, and the aim is to identify where and how farmers can make their businesses more sustainable and environmentally friendly. The first reports are due by May next year. And while there's a lot of advice available from the agricultural advisory services, the whole farm plan has caused confusion and uncertainty for some farmers, as Kathleen Carragher has been finding out.
Most of our animals are outside all year round, but we've got a few in the shed.
I'm with John Macaulay at his 1,400 hectare sheep and cattle farm Dallalea on the shores of Lough Shiel on the Moidart Peninsula in the Scottish Highlands. It's beautiful but rugged countryside.
We're very much a hill farm. It's a very extensive system, quite hard hill ground. Quite poor quality grazing, but we have quite a lot of it, so as long as the cattle get around it all, then they do quite well.
Next year, like farmers across Scotland, John will have to start on the process of whole farm audits. It's a process about which he has considerable concerns.
We're currently establishing a principle of how farm support is going to be shaped without knowing what the end goal of that is. The wording of documents changed quite significantly a few years ago. It's always been a land use mosaic, having a little bit of everything all over the country. But now it's the wording is all landscape scale management.
Do you think a scheme like this can really reflect the diversity and just the sheer complexity of farming across Scotland?
No.
So take your own farm, for example. What would be the variables here?
For the audit, the farm is broken down into field parcels, and within each field parcel there's numerous areas of different biodiversity interest. Initially they wanted to record all of it, but the complexity is such, you just can't do it. At what level do you stop breaking it down to? But they've acknowledged that, and they've realised they have to be more practical with how they apply their rules.
John has another particular variable at Dallalea, which he says illustrates the challenges of meeting the new auditing standards.
We have white-tailed eagles on the farm, which causes quite an impact on our sheep system. I've started lambing indoors, so for that I need to buy a lot more food, employ more people, which all works strongly against my carbon balance. But it's quite a conflict between the biodiversity aspect of my farm and the carbon balance of my farm. And the last thing it seems that's important is the actual farming aspect of my farm.
Well, I suppose the Scottish Government would say that they're setting a new direction, they're setting new targets, and the first way to do that is to establish whole farm plans and make sure that every farmer knows how their business is being run.
Yes, but any farmer who's remotely in touch with their production figures would probably find it quite patronising. The vast majority of farmers are quite in touch with their production figures.
That's John Macaulay ending that report. And tomorrow we'll be hearing from the Scottish Government's Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs, Marie Goujon. Now, as world leaders and climate experts continue talks at COP29 in Baku in Azerbaijan, addressing progress on climate change and sustainability, it's perhaps worth remembering that some big companies are extremely keen to tell us how they're doing their bit for the planet by adopting regenerative farming practices. But, as we have discussed before on this programme, there's no legal or official definition for what regenerative farming actually is. The Soil Association and other bodies have warned that this means there's a danger of greenwashing or misleading the public about their environmental credentials. Now, the Advertising Standards Authority, or ASA, has issued guidance around the use of the term regenerative farming to brands and advertisers. Nikki Baker leads on compliance for the ASA.
We have spent the last few months speaking to various experts, from farmers to big advertisers to trade bodies and government. And the reason we've done this is because we think the average consumer understanding of regenerative farming is currently pretty low. There is currently no legal or universally agreed definition of the term. That's why we've taken preemptive action to try and effectively set some guardrails around its use within an advertising context, so as to avoid consumers being potentially misled. But it's also an attempt to help any advertisers speak about their regenerative farming efforts with confidence and do it in a way that complies with the UK advertising rules.
What are you suggesting that people do? What are those guardrails?
Well, so broadly speaking, we understand regenerative farming to be an approach to farming that aims to be part of the solution to the climate crisis, because in theory, it allows the land, the soil, the water and associated nutrients to effectively regenerate or restore themselves. And we also understand that it typically involves a mix of several farming practices, although we appreciate it's never one size fits all. Things like limiting soil disturbance, maintaining year-round soil cover, promoting biodiversity and crop rotations, integrating livestock and keeping living roots in the soil. And look, clearly it's not for the ASA to try and actually set a legal definition for what regenerative farming is. But in terms of advertising, we would advise anyone looking to communicate what they're doing in this space to ensure that they're being really clear and transparent about what it actually is they're doing. Advertisers should also avoid cherry picking. So if you're just doing one or two of the farming practices that I just mentioned, then that's probably not going to be enough to substantiate a claim that you're farming regeneratively. And because regenerative farming isn't just about actions, it's very much about highly specific and highly measurable outcomes, it's really important to avoid absolute claims like regenerative unless you can fully substantiate regenerative outcomes. So, broadly speaking, we'd advise advertisers to use caution and be really upfront and transparent and honest about the journey they're currently on. Talk about what you're actually doing now rather than what you hope to achieve in future. And again, this is all to do with avoiding overstating the environmental benefits of anything that you might be doing in a way that might potentially mislead consumers.
Do you think there should be an official definition with set standards so that companies who claim to be using regenerative practices actually have something to go on, to stick to?
It would certainly be helpful, I agree, but it's not really for the ASA to make a value judgment one way or the other, or indeed to set those standards. But where we can take action is around the advertising.
Nikki Baker from the Advertising Standards Authority. And that's all we've got time for this morning. But a quick reminder, Farming Today is with you every weekday morning at 5:45, and you can set your smart speaker, if you have one, to switch on Radio 4 just in time to hear our dulcet tones and guarantee you'll be waking up with us every single day. How could you resist? And we're not looking for answers to that question. I'm Kaz Graham, the producer is Rebecca Rooney, and Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.